The day I borrowed my mother's uniform, I thought I was only covering her shift. I had no idea I was walking into the moment that would change both of our lives forever. My mother's waitress uniform still carried the faint scent of lavender detergent and the vanilla hand cream she'd used every morning for as long as I could remember. I buttoned the white blouse carefully, smoothing the wrinkles with nervous hands while she slept on the couch behind me, a cool towel resting across her forehead. Her fever had climbed overnight, and every time she tried to sit up, she ended up coughing until tears filled her eyes. "Emily," she whispered weakly, her voice barely louder than the ticking kitchen clock. "Call the restaurant. Tell them I can't make it." I forced a smile I didn't feel. "Don't worry about work. Just focus on getting better." She reached for my wrist with surprising strength. "Mr. Lawson doesn't like excuses." I looked around our tiny apartment. The wallpaper was beginning to peel near the kitchen window. The old refrigerator hummed louder than usual, and the stack of medical bills sitting beside the coffee maker seemed to grow every week. Missing another paycheck wasn't something we could afford. I picked up her name tag from the counter. Linda Carter. 22 years serving tables without missing more than a handful of shifts. I swallowed hard before pinning it onto my borrowed uniform. "I'll go," I said quietly. "I'll work your shift." Her tired eyes widened. "You've never waited tables before." "Then I'll learn fast." Outside, the October air carried the crisp bite of early fall as I hurried toward the bus stop. Downtown Chicago slowly woke around me. Office workers clutched coffee cups. Delivery trucks rumbled through intersections. The city felt ordinary, almost comforting, completely unaware that my stomach had been tied in knots since sunrise. During the 30-minute bus ride, I replayed everything Mom had ever told me about the restaurant. Smile. Never interrupt conversations. Refill water before anyone asks. Don't argue with customers. Most importantly, never panic. By the time I stepped off the bus, my palms were already damp. Romano's Steakhouse looked even more intimidating in daylight. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the skyline like polished mirrors, and luxury cars lined the valet entrance one after another. Men in tailored suits disappeared through revolving doors while women wearing elegant coats laughed effortlessly beneath the gold lettering above the entrance. I suddenly became painfully aware that my shoes had been resoled twice. The hostess welcomed me politely before her smile faded. "Linda?" she asked. "Mom's sick," I explained. "I'm Emily. I'm filling in today." She blinked twice before disappearing into the manager's office. Seconds later, Mr. Lawson emerged with hurried footsteps and a deep frown. He looked me up and down as though calculating how badly this decision might ruin his day. "You know this isn't a diner," he said. I nodded. "Yes, sir. Our guests expect perfection. I'll do my best." He sighed heavily before handing me a small order pad. "Your best better be enough." The lunch rush hadn't even started, yet every employee moved with quiet urgency. Silverware gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers. White tablecloths stretched across the dining room without a single wrinkle. Every detail seemed carefully controlled, almost rehearsed. I had just finished polishing my first tray when the conversations around me faded all at once. Nobody announced his arrival. Nobody needed to. One by one, servers straightened their posture. The bartender quietly lowered his voice. Even Mr. Lawson immediately adjusted his tie before walking toward the entrance with a smile that looked far more nervous than welcoming. Curious, I glanced toward the front doors. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stepped inside with calm, measured confidence. He wasn't loud. He wasn't surrounded by chaos. Yet somehow, every eye in the restaurant found him within seconds. And without understanding why, mine did too. I had never seen a room grow so quiet because of one person simply walking through a doorway. Nobody rushed him. Nobody announced his name. They just moved, almost instinctively, creating a clear path through the dining room without exchanging a single word. The man acknowledged. No one with dramatic gestures. He simply nodded once to the valet outside before stepping across the polished marble floor as though the restaurant belonged to him. Maybe it did. His charcoal suit fit perfectly, every line clean and effortless, while a silver watch caught the afternoon light for only a second before disappearing beneath his cuff. His dark hair was neatly combed back, revealing calm blue eyes that never seemed hurried. He looked to be in his early 30s, but there was something timeless about the confidence he carried. It was not arrogance. It was certainty. The kind that made everyone else question themselves instead. "Emily." Mr. Lawson's sharp whisper pulled me back. "Eyes on your station." I quickly lowered my gaze. "Yes, sir. That is Mr. Vincent Romano." He paused for half a heartbeat before adding, "Do not make mistakes around his table." I wanted to ask why, but his expression warned me not to. The hostess guided Mr. Romano toward the private dining section near the tall windows overlooking the river. 3 other men joined him, all dressed just as elegantly, but even sitting beside him, they somehow faded into the background. The attention naturally settled on Vincent without him asking for it. I watched as one of the senior servers hurried toward the table carrying menus, only to stop halfway when Mr. Lawson gently took the tray from his hands. "I will handle this myself," the manager said with an unusually polite smile. The same manager who had spoken to me like I was one wrong step away from being sent home. The contrast caught me off guard. My first assignment was simple enough. Refill bread baskets, bring fresh water, clear empty settings from nearby tables. I repeated every instruction in my head as though I were studying for an exam. Keep smiling. Walk slowly. Never reach across a guest. Thank everyone. The restaurant gradually filled until conversations blended into a soft hum beneath the piano music floating through hidden speakers. For a moment, I began believing I might actually survive my first shift. Then Mr. Lawson appeared beside me again. "Emily." I turned immediately. "Table 12 needs sparkling water." My stomach tightened. "Table 12? He looked directly toward the private dining section. "Mr. Romano's table." I nodded before I could lose my nerve. "Yes, sir." The glass bottle suddenly felt much heavier than it should have as I crossed the dining room. Every step sounded louder inside my own head. I reminded myself that he was just another customer. Wealthy, important, intimidating perhaps, but still a customer. As I approached, one of the men paused his conversation while another thanked me with a polite smile. Vincent Romano remained focused on the papers in front of him until I carefully reached for his empty water glass. "Excuse me," I said softly. Only then did he look up. His eyes met mine for barely 2 seconds, but something about the way he studied my face made time feel strangely slower. There was no judgment. No impatience. Just quiet attention, as though he had noticed something everyone else had overlooked. I quickly filled the glass without spilling a single drop. "Thank you," he said. His voice was calm, steady, and unexpectedly warm. "You are welcome, sir." I turned to leave, relieved that everything had gone smoothly, when one of the older servers hurried past carrying a large tray. We narrowly missed each other. My shoulder brushed against the edge of her tray, causing one porcelain dessert plate to slide dangerously close to the rim. My heart nearly stopped. The plate wobbled once before I caught it with both hands just inches from the floor. A few nearby guests gasped quietly before returning to their conversations. I exhaled, embarrassed, my cheeks burning. "I am so sorry," I whispered to the other server. "My fault," she answered kindly. "You saved it." I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. When I glanced back toward table 12, I expected Vincent Romano to have returned to his meeting. Instead, he was still watching me, thoughtful and silent, as though my ordinary mistake had somehow become the most interesting part of his afternoon. The moment I looked away, I told myself to stop imagining things. Men like Vincent Romano did not notice people like me. They noticed contracts, investments, opportunities, maybe even problems worth solving. A temporary waitress wearing someone else's name tag was invisible. That was exactly how I wanted it to stay. The lunch rush arrived all at once. Every table filled within minutes, and the comfortable rhythm I had started finding disappeared beneath a wave of orders, polished silver trays, and polite smiles that hid growing pressure. My notepad quickly filled with requests. Medium rare. Extra butter. No onions. Gluten-free. Sparkling water. More bread. Every conversation blended together until I could barely separate one voice from another. I kept moving because stopping meant falling behind. Emily, one of the senior servers called. Can you take table 8? I need to help with the private room. Of course. I hurried over, balancing 3 plates exactly the way I had watched everyone else do it all afternoon. My shoulders already ached, but I refused to let anyone notice. Every dollar from today's shift mattered. Mom would need another doctor's appointment, and the prescription she had delayed filling all week was still sitting at the pharmacy waiting for payment. That thought alone kept my feet moving. I had just finished clearing table 8 when Mr. Lawson appeared again, somehow managing to look even more tense than before. Emily. Yes, sir? The Romano table requested fresh coffee. My heartbeat skipped. Requested? They have been here nearly 2 hours. He adjusted his tie again. Everything must be perfect. I carried the silver coffee pot carefully, repeating the same silent instructions inside my head. Do not rush. Keep your hands steady. Smile. I approached the table as quietly as possible. One of the gentlemen was discussing a construction project somewhere outside the city while another reviewed architectural drawings spread neatly across the polished wood. Vincent Romano listened more than he spoke. When he finally offered a suggestion, everyone else simply nodded. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody argued. It felt less like agreement and more like trust. I gently poured coffee into the first cup, then the second. Steam drifted upward, carrying the rich aroma through the quiet corner of the dining room. My hands remained steady until I reached Vincent's cup. At that exact moment, someone behind me accidentally bumped the edge of my elbow while squeezing between 2 crowded tables. The coffee pot tilted. My breath caught. A single drop landed on the white linen tablecloth beside Vincent's untouched cup. Only one drop. It barely left a mark. Still, it felt enormous. I immediately placed the pot down and reached for a clean napkin. I am so sorry, sir. Before I could blot the tiny stain, Mr. Lawson was suddenly standing beside me. I had no idea how he had crossed the restaurant so quickly. His face had turned pale. Emily, he said through clenched teeth, forcing a smile for the guests while whispering sharply enough that only I could hear. Step away from the table. My stomach dropped. It was an accident. I can clean it. I said step away. I lowered my eyes, embarrassed beyond words. Conversations at nearby tables continued, but I could feel every member of the staff pretending not to watch. My face burned with humiliation as I prepared myself to apologize again, collect my things, and probably lose the job before my first shift was over. I slowly lifted my head, expecting disappointment from the man whose table I had interrupted. Instead, Vincent Romano looked first at the tiny coffee stain, then at the trembling hand still holding the folded napkin. His expression never changed. Calm. Observant. Thoughtful. Then, before Mr. Lawson could say another word, Vincent quietly asked a question that made the entire table fall silent. You are not Linda Carter, are you? I froze with the napkin still in my hand. For a second I wondered if I had heard him correctly. Around the table, every conversation stopped. Even Mr. Lawson remained perfectly still, his forced smile fading into nervous silence. Vincent Romano had not raised his voice. He had simply asked a question. Somehow, it carried more weight than any order I had heard all day. I glanced down at the silver name tag pinned to my blouse. Linda Carter. My mother's name suddenly felt much heavier than the small piece of metal resting over my heart. I swallowed before answering. No, sir. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted. My name is Emily. His blue eyes never left mine. They were calm, patient, almost curious. Then where is Linda? The question was gentle, but something inside me cracked anyway. I had spent the entire morning pretending everything was normal. Pretending Mom would be fine after a little rest. Pretending we were not worried about doctor bills or overdue rent. Pretending this uniform actually belonged to me. Suddenly I was too tired to pretend anymore. My mother is sick, I answered honestly. She has a high fever, and she could barely stand this morning. Nobody interrupted. One of the businessmen quietly set his coffee cup back onto its saucer without making a sound. She did not want to miss work, I continued. She has worked here for more than 20 years. She kept saying the restaurant needed her. I managed a weak smile that disappeared almost immediately. So I came instead. The dining room around us seemed strangely distant. I could still hear silverware touching china and quiet conversations from other tables, but everything near table 12 felt suspended in time. Vincent looked at the name tag again before shifting his attention back to me. Have you worked here before? No, sir. Today is your first day? Yes. I looked toward the tiny coffee stain on the white tablecloth. And I am afraid I have not made a very good first impression. Before anyone else could speak, Vincent slowly picked up the folded napkin from beside his plate and placed it over the single drop of coffee. The stain disappeared beneath the white cloth. There, he said calmly. Now there is nothing to worry about. I blinked, unsure how to respond. Mr. Lawson quickly stepped forward. Mr. Romano, I sincerely apologize. Emily is only filling in temporarily. I assure you this situation will be handled immediately. Vincent turned his head slightly toward the manager. Handled? The single word was quiet, yet it made Mr. Lawson hesitate. Yes, sir. I meant that I will make certain your dining experience remains flawless. Vincent folded his hands together on the table. Has she been disrespectful? No, sir. Has she ignored your guests? No, sir. Has she been careless? Mr. Lawson glanced toward the tiny stain hidden beneath the napkin. Only the small accident just now. Vincent nodded once. An accident that spilled less coffee than most people leave at the bottom of their cups. Nobody answered. And she came here because her mother was too sick to stand. His voice remained calm, but every word settled over the table with quiet certainty. That sounds less like a problem and more like responsibility. I felt my throat tighten. Nobody had ever described me that way before. Not brave. Not responsible. I had only been trying to keep the lights on at home and give my mother one day to recover without worrying about losing her job. Vincent looked back at me. How is your mother now? I lowered my eyes for a moment before answering truthfully. I do not know. I have been afraid to check my phone because I did not want to seem unprofessional. For the first time since I met him, the corners of his mouth lifted into the faintest hint of a smile, not because he found anything amusing, but because he seemed to understand something about me that I had never needed to explain. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The restaurant carried on around us, glasses clinked softly, quiet laughter drifted from distant tables, and the scent of freshly baked bread floated through the dining room, but everything near table 12 felt wrapped inside its own silence. I lowered my eyes, embarrassed that a complete stranger had shown more concern for my mother in less than 5 minutes than most people had all week. My phone rested inside the pocket of my apron, suddenly feeling heavier than before. I had promised myself I would not look at it until my shift ended. If Mom needed me, I wanted to believe someone would call the restaurant. Vincent leaned back slightly in his chair and glanced toward one of the men seated beside him. They exchanged a look that lasted less than a second, too subtle for me to understand. No words were spoken. Then Vincent returned his attention to me. When was the last time your mother saw a doctor? The question caught me completely off guard. I hesitated before answering. 3 days ago. And? I looked down at my hands. They wanted her to come back if the fever did not improve. Did she? I slowly shook my head. She said missing work would cost more than another doctor's visit. The words sounded even sadder once they were spoken aloud. Vincent remained silent for a few seconds, his expression unreadable. Finally, he reached for his phone, unlocked the screen, and typed a brief message. That was all. No dramatic speech. No visible urgency. Just a few calm movements before placing the phone face down beside his coffee cup. One of the gentlemen across from him glanced at the device as it vibrated almost immediately. He quietly nodded, as though confirming something only the two of them understood. Vincent looked back at me. Emily. Yes, sir? You should check your phone. My heart tightened. Now? Yes. I looked uncertainly toward Mr. Lawson, expecting him to object. Instead, the manager surprised me by nodding. Go ahead. With trembling fingers, I reached into my apron and pulled out my phone. 6 missed calls. 3 messages from our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez. My pulse quickened as I opened the newest text. Emily, do not panic. A doctor just arrived to see your mother. Someone said the visit has already been arranged and paid for. Your mother is resting now. She is in good hands. I read the message twice before my eyes blurred. It did not make sense. We had not called a doctor. We could not have afforded one to make a house call even if we had. My fingers trembled as I looked up. Vincent was quietly stirring his coffee as though nothing unusual had happened. Was that? I could not finish the sentence. He simply answered, Your mother should not have to choose between getting well and keeping her job. I stared at him, searching for the right words, but none came. Sir, I cannot accept something like that. He tilted his head slightly. Why not? Because we cannot repay you. A faint smile appeared in his eyes before it reached his face. I did not offer you a loan. My throat tightened again. Across the table, one of his associates closed a folder in front of him. Should we continue the meeting elsewhere? He asked quietly. Vincent glanced around the dining room. Before answering, No. We will finish here. Then he looked toward Mr. Lawson. One more thing. The manager stepped forward immediately. Yes, Mr. Romano? Vincent spoke with the same calm voice he had used all afternoon, yet every employee within earshot seemed to stop moving. Linda Carter will keep her position. Mr. Lawson blinked. Of course. And Emily Carter. He paused just long enough for everyone to hear the next sentence clearly. No one is to blame her for covering her mother's shift. Responsibility deserves respect, not punishment. The silence that followed felt even louder than before, and for the first time that day, every person in the restaurant seemed to be looking at me for an entirely different reason. The rest of the afternoon felt as though someone had quietly rewritten the rules without telling me. Nothing looked different. The chandeliers still scattered warm light across the dining room. Soft piano music still drifted through the restaurant. Guests continued laughing over expensive lunches while servers moved gracefully between tables. Yet every glance that landed on me carried a different meaning. The same employees who had barely noticed me that morning now smiled as I passed. One server insisted on helping me carry a heavy tray before I could even ask. Another quietly showed me the fastest way to organize dessert orders during the evening rush. Even the hostess who had seemed unsure about me earlier stopped beside the service station long enough to whisper, Your mother raised a wonderful daughter. I thanked her, unsure how to respond without becoming emotional again. Mr. Lawson had changed too. He no longer watched every movement as though waiting for me to fail. Instead, he explained the menu in greater detail, demonstrated how the wine list was organized, and even complimented the way I greeted guests. The transformation happened so naturally that it almost felt unreal. I kept wondering whether everyone was being kind because they genuinely respected what I had done for my mother or because of the man still seated near the window. Every so often, I found my eyes drifting toward table 12 before quickly looking away again. Vincent Romano never called for attention. He never raised his voice or demanded special treatment. His meeting continued with calm conversations, quiet decisions, and occasional moments of silence that somehow seemed just as important as the discussions themselves. Watching him reminded me of deep water. Perfectly still on the surface, impossible to measure underneath. Late in the afternoon, I carried a fresh basket of warm bread toward the private dining section. This time my hands did not shake. I placed the basket gently on the table before stepping back. One of Vincent's associates thanked me politely and reached for a roll. Vincent simply nodded once in acknowledgement before returning to the documents in front of him. For reasons I could not explain, that small gesture meant more to me than dramatic praise ever could have. It felt as though he trusted me to do my job. As I turned to leave, my phone vibrated softly inside my apron. During a quiet moment near the kitchen, I checked the screen. It was another message from Mrs. Alvarez. The doctor's visit went well. Your mother is resting comfortably. Her fever is already coming down. She keeps asking if you are eating enough at work. I laughed through tears before quickly wiping my eyes. That sounded exactly like Mom. Even when she was the one lying on the couch with a fever, she worried about whether I had remembered to eat lunch. Maria, one of the senior servers, noticed my expression as she arranged dessert plates beside me. Good news? She asked. I nodded. My mother is feeling better. Maria smiled warmly. Then today was worth coming in after all. I looked across the dining room again. Vincent happened to be standing beside the window, speaking quietly with one of his associates. The afternoon sunlight reflected against the river behind him, outlining his silhouette in gold. For the first time, I wondered what kind of person noticed a stranger's burden without being asked. Most people offered sympathy. He had offered dignity. There was a difference. Just as I slipped my phone back into my apron, the restaurant's front doors opened once more. A sharply dressed young man walked inside carrying a large bouquet of white lilies and a sealed envelope. Instead of approaching the private dining room, he came directly toward the service station where I stood. Every employee nearby stopped what they were doing as he smiled politely and asked, "Excuse me. Which one of you is Miss Emily Carter?" Every conversation near the service station faded into the background. The young man stood there in a perfectly pressed navy suit, holding the bouquet with both hands as though it deserved the same care as something fragile. The white lilies looked impossibly fresh, their delicate fragrance drifting through the kitchen entrance and mixing with the warm scent of baked bread. In his other hand rested a cream-colored envelope sealed with dark blue wax. "I am Emily Carter," I answered cautiously. He smiled politely. "These are for you, Miss Carter." I instinctively looked over my shoulder, convinced he had mistaken me for someone else. "For me?" "Yes, ma'am." He handed me the bouquet first before offering the envelope. "They were delivered with instructions that they arrive before the dinner service begins." I hesitated. "Who sent them?" His professional smile never changed. "The sender asked that you read the note." Around me, every nearby employee suddenly became very interested in polishing glasses, folding napkins, or organizing silverware while secretly listening to every word. Even Maria could not hide her curiosity. "Go on," she whispered with a grin. "Open it." I carefully broke the wax seal, trying not to damage the thick stationery inside. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and surprisingly simple. There were only 2 sentences. "Miss Carter, thank you for reminding this restaurant that kindness is never an inconvenience. Please tell your mother that her table will always be waiting whenever she is healthy enough to return." There was no signature. None was needed. I slowly folded the card and looked toward the private dining room. Vincent Romano was still speaking quietly with his associates, completely unaware of the attention gathering around me. Or perhaps he was aware and simply chose not to acknowledge it. I could not tell. "Who is it from?" Maria asked. I smiled softly before slipping the note back into its envelope. "Someone who does not like taking credit." Before anyone could ask another question, Mr. Lawson approached with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It looked almost embarrassed. "Emily," he said quietly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" We stepped into a hallway leading toward the employee lockers. He cleared his throat before looking at the floor instead of at me. "I owe you an apology," I blinked in surprise. Sir? This morning I judged you before giving you a chance. He let out a slow breath. Your mother has spent more than 2 decades earning everyone's respect here, and instead of welcoming her daughter, I worried about appearances. I did not know what to say. He continued before I could answer. I spoke with your mother earlier. My eyes widened. You did? After the doctor visited. He smiled faintly. She apologized for missing work. I laughed softly despite myself. That sounds like her. I told her not to worry. He paused. And I meant it. We returned to the dining room just as the evening sunlight began turning the windows amber. The dinner crowd would arrive soon, bringing another busy shift. Yet something inside me had changed. The fear that had followed me through the front doors that morning had quietly disappeared. In its place was something unfamiliar. Confidence. Not because important people had noticed me, but because I had learned that doing the right thing for someone you love is never something to apologize for. As I arranged fresh menus near the entrance, the front doors opened once again. A middle-aged couple stepped inside, followed by a little girl no older than 7, wearing a bright yellow dress and holding her father's hand. She looked around the elegant restaurant with wide, curious eyes before suddenly pointing toward Vincent Romano across the room. Daddy, she whispered loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. That nice man was at Grandma's apartment this afternoon. He brought the doctor. The little girl's voice was innocent, clear, and completely unaware that every person within earshot had stopped moving. Her father gently squeezed her hand, looking embarrassed by the unexpected comment. Emma, he said softly, use your inside voice. But the words had already settled over the dining room. I looked toward Vincent Romano almost instinctively. He did not react with surprise or discomfort. He simply turned toward the family and offered the little girl a warm nod, the same quiet courtesy he had shown everyone else all afternoon. It is nice to see you again, he said. Emma smiled brightly. Grandma feels much better. Mommy said the doctor came just in time. Her mother placed a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. We are so sorry, she said. She likes telling everyone everything. Vincent's expression softened. There is nothing to apologize for. The hostess escorted the family toward another section of the restaurant, but the brief exchange lingered in the air long after they had walked away. I realized then that Vincent had not arranged help only for my mother. Somehow, quietly, he had been helping other people too. Not for recognition. Not for applause. Simply because he believed it should be done. That realization changed something inside me. I had spent the entire day trying to understand why a man surrounded by influence and success would care about an ordinary waitress filling in for her sick mother. Perhaps I had been asking the wrong question. Perhaps kindness was simply part of who he was when nobody expected anything from him. The dinner service began moments later. Guests arrived steadily, filling every reservation on the floor. I moved through the restaurant with more confidence than I had felt that morning. Every order was written carefully. Every tray felt lighter somehow. Even when unexpected requests came from crowded tables, I found myself smiling without forcing it. During a quiet moment, I noticed Vincent standing near the entrance preparing to leave. One of his associates handed him a dark overcoat, while another quietly gathered the folders from their meeting. Before walking toward the exit, Vincent paused beside the reception desk where Mr. Lawson stood reviewing reservations. They exchanged only a few words, too quietly for me to hear, but I watched the manager's face shift from polite attention to genuine surprise. Mr. Lawson nodded several times before shaking Vincent's hand with unusual sincerity. As Vincent turned toward the front doors, our eyes met once again across the dining room. I hesitated for only a second before walking over. Mr. Romano? He stopped. Yes, Emily? I held the bouquet of lilies a little closer, suddenly feeling nervous all over again. I never thanked you properly. He waited without speaking. My mother is smiling tonight because of you, I said quietly. I do not think I will ever forget that. For a brief moment, the busy restaurant seemed to disappear. Vincent looked at the flowers before meeting my eyes again. Then promise me something instead. Anything. When your mother feels well enough to come back, let her return without carrying today's worries with her. I nodded immediately. I promise. A faint smile appeared on his face. Good. He started walking again, then stopped after only 2 steps as though remembering something. Without turning around completely, he said, Emily. Yes? The world notices successful people every day. He glanced back over one shoulder. It does not notice responsible daughters nearly often enough. Before I could answer, he continued toward the entrance. The valet opened the doors, the cool evening breeze drifted inside, and Vincent Romano disappeared into the fading Chicago sunset with the same quiet confidence he had carried from the moment he arrived. I stood there holding a bouquet of white lilies, unaware that the greatest surprise of this unforgettable day had not happened yet, because waiting for me at home was a conversation my mother had kept secret for more than 20 years. When I finally clocked out, the city felt quieter than it had that morning. The streets of downtown Chicago glowed beneath rows of amber streetlights, and a cool breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves through the nearly empty bus stop. The bouquet of white lilies rested carefully across my lap during the ride home, while the folded note remained safely inside my apron pocket. Every few minutes I caught myself reading it again, searching for something. Hidden between the lines? There was nothing complicated about the message. That was what made it unforgettable. By the time I unlocked our apartment door, the lights inside were already on. The familiar smell of homemade chicken soup drifted into the hallway before I even stepped inside. My mother was sitting on the couch with a blanket over her shoulders, looking tired but noticeably stronger than she had that morning. The color had returned to her face. The moment she saw me carrying the flowers, her eyes widened with surprise. Emily, she said softly, where did those come from? I smiled before setting the bouquet in an old glass pitcher filled with water. It is a long story. She laughed quietly. Then sit down. I have nowhere else to be. I told her everything. I told her about my first shift, about spilling a single drop of coffee, about Mr. Lawson, about the doctor who somehow arrived before I could even make a phone call, about the note, and finally about the man named Vincent Romano who had changed the course of an ordinary day without ever asking for recognition. She listened without interrupting, her expression becoming more thoughtful with every detail. When I finally finished, the apartment grew silent. My mother looked down at her hands for several long seconds before speaking. I hoped I would never have to tell you this story. I sat a little closer. Tell me what? She looked toward the lilies standing beside the window. More than 20 years ago, before you were born, I worked at a small neighborhood diner on the south side. I waited quietly. One rainy evening, a young man came inside just before closing. His suit was soaked, one of his shoes was damaged, and he looked like he had not eaten all day. She smiled faintly at the memory. He only ordered coffee because that was all he could afford. My heart began beating faster. Was it him? She nodded slowly. He could not have been older than 20. While he searched every pocket for money, I realized he did not have enough to pay. She looked at me with gentle eyes. So I told him the meal was already covered. The truth was that I paid for it myself. I stared at her in disbelief. You never told me. Because it was only a bowl of soup and a sandwich. She shrugged softly. People help each other. That is what decent people do. She reached into the drawer beside the couch and removed an old photograph that had faded around the edges. It showed the tiny diner where she used to work. Standing near the counter was a much younger Linda Carter wearing the same warm smile she still had today. Sitting at the corner booth, barely recognizable beneath wet hair and a worn jacket, was a young Vincent Romano looking directly into the camera with quiet determination. I felt a chill run through me. He remembered. I whispered. My mother smiled through tears gathering in her eyes. Some people never forget kindness when they receive it at the moment they need it most. I looked out the apartment window toward the distant skyline glowing beneath the night sky and thought about everything that had happened in a single day. I had walked into the restaurant believing I was protecting my mother's job. I walked out understanding something far more valuable. Real power is not measured by how many people fear your name. It is measured by how faithfully you remember the people who showed you compassion before the world knew who you would become.